I'm starting to realize that one of the things I'm beginning to be deeply afraid of is not what you would really think. It's not failure, rejection, or the future. It's actually my own mind and the stories it creates. Because something that I've been learning so much in the last few months is that everything is a story. The way you see yourself, a story. Other people, a story. Your capabilities, your worth, your future, all stories. And the scary reality about this is that the story you are telling yourself about your life might be completely wrong. So, hey, everybody, and welcome back to Getting Your Driving, where we remind you, me, reminds you that you are the driver of your own life and that you have agency and that life is tough, but you are tougher. And today we are figuring out which stories might be driving your car and how you can take back the wheel. The very first thing that I want to get into is that we are unreliable narrators. A few weeks ago, I watched this TED talk that really made me think about this idea of not being a reliable narrator. And actually, I had heard of this before in some random podcast. And I remember really liking it, but I think I had a lot of other things on my mind at the time. So it kind of went in the back of my mind. But then it was like the second time hearing it, the second time this idea of narrators was clicking to me, and I thought, "You know what? I'm going to like really dive deep into this TED Talk." So, a lot of the podcast is going to be quotes that she said and kind of like digging those apart and us making sense of them. So, one of the things she said was that we are all unreliable narrators of our own lives. I want you to really think about that. We are all unreliable narrators of our own lives. So, in books and in movies, right? Like sometimes like a lot of times there's a narrator, right? I mean, especially in books, like there's always a narrator. There's someone telling you the story, but their version isn't necessarily quite accurate, right? Like they're biased, they're leaving things out, and they genuinely believe their version is the truth, right? But when we realize that there's other people going on and the story's happening, we know that there's pieces that they don't know, right? Like as an audience in the movies and the books, we often get to see the multiple perspectives, right? We see one character's point of view, what they think happened, what they think is true, but then we get to see the other character's point of view, their perspective, and we realize, oh, wait, she thinks it went this way, but he actually experienced it this way, and he thinks this, and that's why she thinks this, right? And like we know all these things, but unfortunately in real life, we don't get to know what's going on in the inner monologue of the other characters. But here's the thing, in books and movies, if we didn't have that context, if we only saw one character's narration, aka us, we'd be just as limited as they are. We'd believe their version was the whole truth because, again, that's all we would know. And that's us in real life. That's every single one of us. We're walking around thinking we see reality clearly, but really, we're just narrating our own version of events, and then we present that version as the ultimate truth in our world of our mind. And why this really matters, especially I think if you're drowning in negativity, self loathing, whether it's coming from other people, societal pressure, like you're in your own head, I think what you're hearing and believing in your mind and what's making you struggle are these stories. And many of these stories probably aren't factual and they're not fully true. Another example is the things I think we hear when we are out in the world. For example, when somebody might say something like, all relationships fail, or you can't make money doing that, or people like us don't succeed. Well, they're telling you the story in their head, shaped by their experiences, their limited perspective, and they're presenting it to you, though, when they say this as a universal truth. But the thing is, it's not. Really, what you're hearing is the story they've been telling themselves in their head. And think about it like this. Imagine you and your siblings sitting down to tell the story of your childhood. Same house, same parents, same family. But I guarantee the stories you'd each tell would be completely different because it's not just about different memories or different events. It's about how you each interpreted everything through your own lens, how your parents made you feel, the season of life your parents were in when you were born versus when your sibling was born, the role you played in the family, the attention you got or didn't get, the comparisons that were made. I once heard a therapist say that no children have the same parent. And I thought, that's so freaking true. And, anyways, your sibling might tell a story about maybe feeling overlooked while you got all the attention. Meanwhile, you might tell a story about feeling pressure to be perfect while your sibling just got to exist. Same childhood, but completely different story. And the kicker is that you're both telling yourself stories about each other too. And maybe stories that the other person would most likely find unfair or incomplete if they heard them. But to each of you, your version feels like the truth because it's all you know. And that ties to another thing that the speaker said, which I loved, which was telling a story is inescapably taking a moral stance. When people tell their version of events, especially stories about how someone wronged them or whatever it may be, they're not just recounting facts, right? They're assigning roles: victim, villain, hero. They're making a moral judgment about who was right and who was wrong. And this is human nature. And I think it can be uncomfortable to admit pretty much most of the time that people have another point of view, people have other experiences, and that two things can be true at the same time, or that perhaps we've manipulated facts due to our own hurt feelings and our limited capacity. And another thing that she said that really connected a lot of things for me too was that stories are the way that we make sense of our lives. And this is so true because think about it. Without stories, it's kind of harder to put the pieces together. If not, I think life would be like a lot of very random facts happening to us. But when we create stories in our head, that gives us a lot of structure, right? Helps us remember. And then again, we can create characters: victim, hero, villain, winner, loser. And I think these roles just make it easier for us to grasp, even if they do, unfortunately, probably oversimplify reality. And I don't want this to be like me saying stories are bad. We need them, but it just gets really tricky. And another thing that she said is that the way we narrate our lives shapes what they become. Again, the way we narrate our lives shapes what they become. So, this whole thing about telling your stories, it's very big deal because that's not just about how we remember our past when we tell ourselves stories. What these stories we're telling ourselves are also about how we move forward in the future and right now. These stories tell us about who we are, what we're capable of, what we deserve. I mean, every single story is actively shaping our future. And if you're telling yourself something like, I'm not good enough, I'm not lovable, I'm not smart enough, whatever it may be, for example, maybe you don't feel capable enough. You're not going to apply for that job. You're not going to speak up in the meeting. You're not going to try. You're not going to want to talk to strangers because the story always is, well, I'm not capable. I can't do that. Again, maybe you're telling yourself, I'm so unlovable. That story is going to shape how you show up into every single relationship. Maybe you'll push people away. Maybe you'll meet them very anxiously. Maybe you'll settle for less. Maybe you'll choose people that aren't a good fit for you. Like, again, unfortunately, these stories become such a reality. And I think there's two ways to look at it. It can, like everything else in life, this can be terrifying and we can fall into victim mode, or it can be empowering and we can think, okay, what am I going to do about this? And I want you to think though about how you're not just experiencing your life, you're actually writing about it and you have a story in your head about it, whether you think you do or not. And every day you are choosing which narrative to believe, which story to follow, and which version of yourself to step into. And I feel like this actually really goes back to one of my core pillars of the podcast, which is truth seeking. And I do think if we're going to drive our lives intentionally, we do have to be willing to look at the stories we're telling ourselves and really ask, but is this actually true about me or this person? Or is this just the narrative I've been repeating for so long in my head that it feels true? And that's where the work begins. And that's what we're going to unpack as we keep on moving forward. So, before we get into practicalities, I want to talk about a story that I told myself for a very long time that really held me back because we're going to go on this idea of the fact that we are unreliable narrators. I had been carrying this around for a while, but I only realized about a year ago that it was a really big problem. And this story was that I'm stupid. This story started when I was really young, like I think most of these things probably do. To give a little background, I was homeschooled by my mom, and my mom is very sharp, technical, very engineering type of mind. My brother actually has the same kind of brain as her, very logical. They process information quickly. They're quick to grasp concepts that to me are very complex. They just get it. And my brain is very different. I'm more creative. I process things in a very different way. And because of that, concepts that came very easily to my mom did not come as easily to me. And I think without meaning to, my mom made me feel bad about this difference. And this came out a lot when we were doing school together. I think she just really couldn't understand why I struggled with a lot of things that felt very effortless to her. And unfortunately, she often compared me to my brother. Again, don't think this was malicious, but I think in a way that parents do when they feel very frustrated and don't know what else to say. So they compare you to your sibling who is shining in an area in that you're just not shining. And side note here, I am no parent, but I don't think children should ever be compared because unfortunately we are creatures that remember the bad and not the good. And every single comparison that my mom made to me about my brother stuck with me in a terrible way. And I can't speak for my brother, but he can probably say the same. And I'm sure any sibling could. But anyway, there's really one moment I can think of where this idea of me being stupid, very much so, was cemented into my brain. And it was when my brother graduated college. My mom was glowing, kind of radiating with that pride that really only mothers can have for their sons. And I remember at the end of the day, we went to this restaurant. We had a big graduation dinner. A lot of my family was there. And of course, we were celebrating him. And my mom kind of got up and she said something. She gave a little speech. And yeah, it was a nice little speech. But at the very end of the speech, she looked right at me in front of everyone and said, "And Maria, I don't know what we're going to do with you." I will never forget that moment. I was not expecting her to do that. I don't know why she did that. I've never even told her about it. But I do remember my dad was sitting next to me and he grabbed my hand and he looked at me with so much love and reassurance and he said, "Don't worry, Maria, we'll figure it out." Cuz I again like I was just like listening to her speech and happy and I didn't expect her to bring me up in the end, right? And in this way, I mean, I was very, very ready to break down. And unfortunately, the damage was done, whether my mom wanted to do that or not. And subconsciously, this line she said, I already was carrying it, but this just really solidified it. And again, like in my head, well, I'm Maria. I'm not capable. I'm not smart enough. I have nothing to offer. I'm Maria. I'm not capable. I'm not smart enough. I have nothing to offer. This story really did follow me in high school and college, into job applications, into friendships, especially with people maybe who landed more like my mom and my brother with analytical minds. Like it was bleeding into everything. And the best way to describe this feeling is like feeling that there was always a piece of information that I was missing that everyone else had. Like, that really is how I can sum up this feeling of like, I'm stupid. It's like, what do they know that I don't know? And I have never felt entirely confident in my own skills or knowledge. Like, there was just always a voice in my head of like, you are not smart enough for this. You shouldn't be here. You shouldn't be talking about this. Again, you have nothing to offer. And I really, really, really believed this to be true. Truly. Like, it really wasn't until last year that a lot of things were holding me back, and I was finally realizing I need to like snap out of this. And interestingly enough, this came to me in a realization about when I was going to this storytelling event. So last year I was trying to like go to all these events, and one that looked really interesting was the storytelling event, and I had been to it a few times already. And the theme for the next week, because he would let you know a week before what the theme was lies. And I remember thinking, I've been a few times. I really should try and go up and tell a story. And then I was thinking, lies, lies, lies. Like, I'm not much of a liar. What can I do? And it had me pondering just about my life. And then it hit me. Ooh, what about lies that we tell ourselves and how those lies are dangerous? And then I thought to myself, what's a lie that maybe I've told myself about myself? And then boom, I was like, the lie that I'm stupid. And I was like, oh my gosh, this lie has affected me like frick. So I went to the event and I was prepared to tell my story. I knew absolutely no one at this storytelling event. I can't tell you how freaky it was, but it's kind of like one of those things where everybody's being vulnerable. So you're just kind of like, okay, I can do it. I can do it. So I got up in front of all these strangers and I told this story, and I had it all laid out and done. Like, I went super prepared. I followed like the model of a story, the resolution, the problem, the conflict. Like, I came super prepared, and I told my story and how I'd been carrying this around for such a long time. And there was definitely some people in the crowd. I feel like my mom and brother's faces were in the crowd of, like, the people representing the analytical mind and being like, "What do you mean you're stupid? What do you mean this was a problem for you? Like, what?" Because super smart people just don't get it. And it was awful. Like, again, I saw them in the crowd, and it was like, "What am I doing?" But then as I kept going, I saw other faces in the crowd of people that I felt really related to me and what I felt, and that was just so great. So, I told my story, and after the event, I really made a conscious effort to be like, "Okay, now that I'm aware of this, it's my responsibility to change this narrative in my head," because this story had been driving my car. I mean, it'd been making all these subconscious decisions for me, like, it'd been keeping me small, stuck, just awful, 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 awful. And again, after that event, I really realized it's now my responsibility to change it. It's not my mom's, it's not my brother. I can't be mad. Like, this is Maria's responsibility. And it would be wrong for me to just sit around and blame my family. Because whether the story started with something someone said to me or something that happened to me, at some point in your life, and I really think once you hit 25, this is when you gotta take responsibility. And I already think 25 is pushing it, but we live in a time where people are taking longer, and we can argue that our brain is fully developed at 25. But at 25, amiga, friend, hmm, we got to be doing something. So I realized that I'm the one who's repeating the story. I'm the one who's believing it. I'm the one who, when I feel sad that I can't do something, goes back to my head and like, oh, I'm so stupid. Like, I was the one who was doing this. But then I realized I'm also the one who has the power to rewrite this story. So I'm still rewriting this story. Like, I've gotten a lot better, but it's still a lot, and I'm still very triggered when I do encounter people like my mom and brother. And I've realized, okay, I'm never going to be an engineer. I'm never going to be a lawyer. I'm never going to have an analytical mind. It's not going to happen, and that's fine. But I'm smart and capable in my own way. And I process the world differently. And that's not a weakness, it's just a difference from the people that I've always been comparing myself to. Because also, I do know a lot of people that are more like me, and I think they're very smart, but they don't have an analytical mind. And again, I had to really ask myself, do I fully believe this story about myself? And I was like, no. And don't get me wrong, some days it creeps in and I have to fight. And I think that there's always a little bit of rewriting to do here. But as the speaker said in the TED Talk, the way we narrate our lives shape what they become. I was tired of my life becoming this story of I'm stupid and that genuinely holding me back from a lot of things and shaping my life in so many wrong ways. And I'm sharing this with you because everybody has a story like this. And again, maybe it's not good enough. Maybe I'm not lovable. Maybe it's that I'm not capable. I'm not worthy. Like, we have so many stories inside our heads. I just shared one, and a lot of times someone else planted these, and an event planted this. But now, after 25, after realizing you have responsibility, you need to realize, but you've now been watering it and tending to it for years. And that's what, made me wake up about like this whole stupid story. Like, of course, it hurts when I think about how my mom unintentionally made me feel, but now I have to fix this. And what I want you to hear is that whatever this story is or these stories are, they're driving your car. They're driving your life. They're making decisions for you. They're keeping you from trying, from risking, from showing up and being the person that you actually want to be. Like, I really can't say and make the point enough of how limiting we are because of this and how we limit things that we want to do in our life. And we got to get rid of these stories. We got to outgrow them. We got to understand that these things don't serve us anymore. And like I said, I only shared one story with you. I have a lot of other stories that I need to fix. And the most important part with all of this, though, is recognition and understanding that we all carry these narratives. But if we want to stay in the driver's seat of our lives, we have to start examining them. We have to start taking agency. We have to ask, is this true? Or is this just a story I've been telling myself for so long that it feels true? There's very difference between something being true and actually feeling true. So that's the work. And again, I think it really does just start with being honest enough to want to look. Now, I want to get a bit into how we all do this and why it's keeping us stuck. So, again, I just talked about my story about being stupid, but like I said before, this is just one story, right? There's many others, and this isn't just about me, it's about all of us because we tell stories about everything again capabilities, our lovability, our future, money, success, relationships, our body, our worth, whether you're the kind of person who can do XYZ, whatever, right? And these stories end up feeling like truth to us, the ultimate truth, because we've been repeating them for so long and they feel like reality because a lot of times they are based on our actual experiences. But here's what's actually happening is that we're trapped in our own limited perspective, right? I came across this image recently that I really can't stop thinking about, and it shows two circles. It's that simple. So it's one circle, totality, and then there's one tiny, tiny circle within that circle labeled your personal experiences. And then the rest of the circle, which is massive, is labeled everything that exists beyond your experiences. So that tiny, tiny circle that was barely visible, that's our experience. That's our point of view. And the rest of the ginormous circle is, again, it's our experiences versus everything that exists beyond them. And it's just a reminder of how it was a nice visual reminder of just how limited our individual lens really is. So, if we let our small set of experiences become the whole story, the whole circle, that's very, very dangerous, and it's distorting our reality. And think about it. If you've only, for example, I'm going to take relationships. If you've only seen relationships fall apart, you unconsciously project that version onto every love story you encounter. Or if you've only experienced rejection in your career, you start believing you're not meant to succeed. Or if you grew up hearing you weren't smart, like me, you carry that into every challenges because we take this limited data and we make it a universal truth. So, how do we counter this? And I think how we counter this is overloading our brain with more data. Just like think about ChatGPT. That ChatGPT gets so much data poured into it all the time. So we overload our brain with more data. We seek out other examples, other outcomes, other stories, other people, because I think that when we expose ourselves to more, to people who've overcome what we're struggling with, to outcomes we maybe haven't personally experienced, to perspectives beyond our own, we realize there are so many more possibilities than the stories we've been telling ourselves. Most of the time, what's holding you back isn't reality, it's the story you're telling yourself about reality. And this is where another one of my core pillars comes in about living intentionally. We need to choose which stories we listen to. And we have to actively seek out evidence that contradicts this limited narrative in our head, because if we don't, these stories will keep on driving. And I personally think they will keep us in circles and we won't be able to become the people that we want to be and the people that are just going to do so much better in life. So, very quickly, before we get into how to edit our stories, I want to talk about limiting beliefs versus factual limitations. And as I was garnering all my thoughts about this TED talk that I listened to, I actually was listening to another podcast that got into what I just said, limiting beliefs versus factual limitations. And it really connected super, super well. And what she said on the podcast was somebody asked her, what's the difference between limiting beliefs and factual limitations? And I thought, oh my gosh, this is amazing because this is the real question, right? How do you know if the story you're telling yourself is actually true or if it's just a belief that is keeping you stuck? So the host said something I loved, which is factual limitations are positive, while limiting beliefs are negative, and they're there because it's simply how our brain coped and how it categorized them. Then she added, when confronted with a limitation, you have the power to make it a limiting belief or to reframe it as a factual limitation and one that is essentially inviting you to grow. So if you remove your emotion from it and see it as life, the universe, God, whatever you want it to be, calling you to be better for yourself. And let's take my example of being stupid, right? Like this was a limiting belief and I confronted it. And now I had the power to reframe this limiting belief of mine into a factual limitation. And that is what was now challenging me to grow. And the way I did that was telling myself, like, okay, it is true that I don't have an analytical mind, but it's not true that I'm stupid and I have nothing to offer. It's just that what I have to offer is going to look a little bit different. So I hope that makes sense. And what I realized is that 99% of the time, the stories keeping us stuck are just limiting beliefs disguised as truth. And we need to reframe them into just factual limitations. I mean, yeah, there are instances of factual limitations, but I think for the most part, they're very rare. And the thing is, with limiting beliefs, being disguised as truth, it's tricky because they feel true because we've repeated them. They feel real because they're based on our experiences. But again, they're not the whole truth. They're just one interpretation. So, how do you tell you the difference between a limiting belief and a factual limitation? Ask yourself these three questions. One, does this story keep me small, stuck, or scared? Two, does it leave room for growth or does it feel final? And then three, is this based on one or two experiences or have I actively sought out other perspectives? If your story is feeling heavy, closed off, hopeless, you just going in this loop in your brain, it's probably a limiting belief. If it feels like information that's pointing you towards growth, I think that's a factual limitation inviting you forward. And again, this is truth seeking in action. This is intention in action. This is being willing to step back, remove your emotion from the story, and look at your story objectively. And I'm going to be honest, it actually took me a really long time to remove my emotion from the story of being stupid. Like, I was convinced, I was angry at my mom about it, like whatever. But when I really came to the point of view of like, okay, but do I want to keep on with this? Like, it's not helping me. And I just faced the truth of maybe there's a lot of emotion in here, and that's okay because these stories hurt and they probably were cemented and began for good reason. Like, of course, my mom making that comment was real, and that's objectively, I think, hurtful. But again, I was the one continuing to tell the story in my head. So we've come to the exciting part, editing our story. So once you've realized, because most of the time you're going to realize that it's a limiting belief, what do? You edit. So here's what I think a lot of people don't tell you, which is why I created this podcast, is that, and it's another one of the quotes from the TED Talk. She said, change, even really positive change, involves a surprising amount of loss. I really, 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 really liked that. And again, this goes back to waking up to the story that we've been telling ourselves and confronting it is very, very painful. Whether it's that you're a victim, whether it's that you're unlovable, whether it's I'm the always one right, or I'm not capable, whatever it may be. When you realize you've been living in a distorted version of reality, that's just uncomfortable, it's confronting, it's painful. And then to have to change it means you have to be brutally honest. And editing your story means going back in and, again, admitting some really hard truths about where you filled in gaps with guesses, maybe because it felt better in the moment, where your version wasn't fully aligned with reality, where you were actually maybe responsible for some of your suffering. And this really goes back to, again, truth, intentionality, personal responsibility, which is another one of my core pillars. Like, you have to own the role that you've also been taking in the story. And that's really hard because, again, it's easier to blame somebody else, to blame life, to blame the universe. It's so much easier to stay a victim or the hero in your story, right? Like, no one wants to be the villain. Nobody does. But this is just how it goes. But again, if you want to drive your life, you have to be willing to edit. And when you let go of these old narratives, you really do lose the familiar roles. You lose victim, you lose hero, you lose the villain. And again, like, that's scary. It's uncomfortable. This is how you've made sense of your life for so long. Like, we have identities in these stories. It's almost like if you believed your whole life that yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to come up with an example, a random example. What could be a random example? Uh, if you believe your whole life that maybe let's make a really big one, dramatic, that God is real. I'm just gonna go to God, and then you go into an environment of full atheists, and then they know you for only 20 minutes and they're trying to convince you within 20 minutes that God isn't real. Well, one, that's unrealistic. And two, this is like trauma in so many ways for you because you're having to look back at your whole life and be like, are they right? Is is God not real? This is earth shattering. And even though it took me a minute to like think about an example, I think God is like a really big one, right? I'm not trying to sit here and tell you God isn't real. I'm just trying to sit here and tell you that these stories are like fundamental to our identities and how we see ourselves. So confronting it and changing it is literally earth shattering in it. And it's almost very humbling to be like, oh my God, is this all a lie? And not only that, did I believe this lie? Was I such a sucker? Like, I know that's kind of where my brain went. So yeah, it's a lot. This is a lot. But here's what you gain: you gain a truer story, you gain one with more angles, more accountability, more nuance. And I think more importantly, doing this gains you a lot more freedom, because when you're not trapped in one rigid narrative, you can start driving, you can make different choices, you can see new possibilities, right? And also, something that I didn't mention is maybe something that I should have done with my story of telling myself that I was stupid was ask people, how do you see me? Like, what do you think? Because at that time, actually, I had a couple friends that I was kind of like sharing it with, and they were like, I've never seen you as stupid ever. I actually think you're extremely intelligent. And I was like, you do? Like, what are you talking about? Like sometimes people contribute to us, like to affirming the negative belief, but a lot of times sharing with people can be amazing because people see us differently than we see ourselves. And especially people that love us and adore us and admire us. Of course, my friend was like, I've never seen you stupid. Like, what are you talking about? And for the first time, it made me think, like, oh, if she doesn't think I'm stupid, then maybe she's onto something. So, again, it's very hard to confront this, but then you can be open to new possibilities. And another quote from the TED Talk that really serves us right now is she said, there is nothing more important to the quality of our lives than the stories we tell ourselves about them. There is nothing more important to the quality of our lives than the stories we tell ourselves about them. So again, I was telling myself a story that was not good for the quality of my life. And I want you to understand, life isn't just what happens to you, it's how you narrate what happens to you. And when we want to edit our story, when we want to be the authors again, this is agency. This is getting in the driver's seat, as I always say. One final question that I want to leave you with for this section of editing your story is, what would happen if you looked at your story and you wrote it from another person's point of view? So I already touched on this a little bit, but yeah, what if you stepped outside your own narrative and tried to see it from someone else's perspective? Where might you be wrong? Where might be the other person be right? What are you not seeing because maybe you're too attached to your own version? Again, this can be positive and negative. Maybe you're going to hear people say things that are like, okay, this actually makes your story true. But also, I think people are going to be able to help you a lot and help you see yourself differently. And something I've been thinking about is that sometimes sharing the story you're telling yourself with a friend or a loved one, again, like my friend, is just really, really powerful, because I think that they are going to somehow change the narrative in really good ways that help you, because they're going to see blind spots. They're maybe going to recognize where you haven't been honest with yourself enough, or maybe an area where you've been too harsh on yourself and it's not serving you. And this is all work. And I want to be honest that it's all courageous work, which leaves me on one of my last pillars of the podcast, which is courageous optimism. And again, it really takes courage to question your own narrative, to think about where you were wrong, to go back and look at like things that have shaped you and that have pained you. But again, if you want to be the driver of your own life, this is what we have to do. Or we shall end this with choosing which stories to listen to and the responsible choice to make. So, we've talked about editing your own story and many other things, but I want to leave you with what I think is perhaps the most important part of everything that we discussed today. And if you just take one bit, I really want it to be this bit, which is one more quote from the TED Talk. And it is, life is about choosing which stories to listen to and which ones need an edit. So, this isn't just about the stories you tell yourself. I want to now have you think about the stories that other people and the world around you are telling you. Because what happens a lot, or no, what happens all the time is that, like I touched on this in the beginning, people have their own stories that they're telling themselves in their head. And then when they share this with you, or their opinion or whatever, they're sharing it as like this universal truth. Again, going back to things like all relationships fail, you can't make money doing that, people like me don't succeed, love ends badly, you're not cut out for this, like all these things that we go out and hear on a daily basis and that we're just quite frankly surrounded by. And when you hear these stories or these sentiments over and over, especially from people that not aren't just strangers, but people that you love and trust, you start to believe them. You start to absorb them as your own. You start to internalize them. But your job is to recognize that that's their story, shaped by their experiences, which is why I always say it doesn't have to be your story. And always remember in all of your encounters, even with people that you love and trust, take it with a freaking grain of salt. Be a free thinker. Even with this podcast, don't just listen to me. Think about it for yourself. So, if you're drowning in negativity, whether it's from the world, society, friends, family, culture, whatever it is, whatever is happening around you, whatever is making you feel awful, I want you to recognize that these are things being handed to you by other people's narratives. They're not necessarily facts. So please do not internalize them. They are interpretations. They are stories shaped by someone else's tiny circle of experiences and choices that they've made in their life. You need to inundate your mind with a bunch of data and not just this pessimistic data. And you have to decide what you want to believe. You have to decide how you're going to allow these experiences to shape you. And that responsibility is yours alone. It's yours alone. Stop blaming other people. And again, this is what it means to be the driver in your life. Get in because you are driving. So, every day you're choosing which narratives to believe, which stories to let in, which ones to question, which ones to reject entirely. And this is an ongoing daily thing, right? This doesn't just happen one time and then boof, 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 we're done. Because maybe you fixed a story you've been telling yourself your whole life, but then maybe in 2 years you're going to have a new story about whatever else. You have to tackle this and you have to be courageous in tackling this. You have to be truthful in tackling this. You have to be intentional in tackling this. And you have to be responsible and accountable in tackling this. And I know those are all words that a lot of people don't like. But unfortunately, if we do not invoke these words into our vocabulary, I do think you're going to suffer way more than you need to. Way more than you need to. So, again, it takes courage to question the narratives around you, especially if you've believed them for such a long time and you just feel they're truly a part of you. But, but, this is probably a limiting belief, okay? It's probably not a factual limitation. So, reframe your mind. Our brain is so amazing and it's so malleable, and we can truly change our beliefs when we change our thoughts. So, life is tough, but you're tougher, but you always have the willingness and ability to choose. So, I hope you are able to take that away from this podcast episode. And as always, thank you so much for being here. I hope this can be so helpful to you, and I will catch you in the next episode.